Chapter 14. April. No, 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 no. April stared at the test and shook her head. She could not be pregnant. She just couldn't be. But she knew that wasn't true. She'd definitely engaged in the one behavior that could result in pregnancy. And even though they'd been careful, she knew the only 100% effective method was abstinence. With a stone in her stomach, she sank onto the floor. She'd felt weird the last week, more tired than usual, and dizzy when she bent over. But she'd chalked it up to stress. After all, she'd been trying to reach Carter for the last week, but he was clearly ignoring her, which just made this hurt even worse. An unexpected pregnancy would be bad enough when there was a chance they could become a couple, but it was the worst possible thing to happen now that it was pretty clear he had lived up to Lucia's warnings. With a heavy sigh, she drew her knees to her chest and dropped her head to her knees. She should have listened to Lucia. Why did she have to be so stubborn and always think she knew best when it was clear that she didn't? What was she going to do? She hadn't been expecting an actual answer, but beside her, her phone began to buzz. Though she knew it was unlikely. A tiny seed of hope that it could be Carter blossomed within her. He hadn't invited her to his practice today, but maybe he'd realized that he missed her. That could happen, right? He could change his mind. April picked up the phone and took a deep breath before turning the screen so she could read it. There was a text message, but it wasn't from Carter. It was from Lucia. "I'm so sorry, April." Uh-oh, that didn't bode well. April felt her stomach tighten as she watched the dots blink across the screen that indicated Lucia was typing something. If Lucia was apologizing, it could mean only a few things. She chewed on her lip, wondering if she should ask why, but before she could, another text popped onto her screen. "Carter brought another woman to the practice today." And there it was, the nail in the coffin. "Are you okay?" Okay? She was definitely not okay. "Call me if you need to talk." Oh, she needed to talk all right, but not to Lucia. She needed to talk to Carter, and other woman or not, now might be the only time she would catch him. After all, she hadn't been to his house, so she had no idea where he lived, and she doubted that he'd be showing up at her door. She glanced at her watch. There was probably still time to catch him at the stadium if she left right now. She knew he'd have to shower and change before leaving. The question was, could she handle seeing him with whatever other woman he'd brought? While she didn't know the answer to that, she knew she had to try. Regardless of what she decided to do about this pregnancy, he deserved to know. As she fired up the ignition and backed out of the drive, she realized it was deeper than that. A part of her hoped that he might change his mind about breaking things off with her if there was a baby involved. His baby. Another part of her was scared to death to have a baby and hoped he might tell her it was okay to terminate the pregnancy. Though she'd been staunchly pro-choice her whole life, now that she was faced with the decision, she wasn't sure it was what she wanted to do. Mostly, she just wanted Carter to make the decision for her. The sun had already set by the time she reached the parking lot, but the safety lights were on. April pulled into a spot near Carter's car and parked so she could see the exit from the stadium. Her stomach churned and rumbled, a combination of nerves and hunger. She could get food on the way home, but this had to be done first. It didn't take long for Carter and a beautiful blonde to appear in the parking lot. April took a tiny sliver of satisfaction as she noted that Carter wasn't holding the woman's hand or touching her in any way. In fact, though his face was still too far away to see, she was almost certain that his posture was stiff. Maybe he didn't actually like the woman and had been forced to bring her. Or maybe he'd thought he wanted to play the field again, but realized he liked April. Those were silly thoughts. His lack of communication had made it clear that their future wasn't bright. April took a deep breath and then opened her door. She closed it softly and leaned against the car, waiting for Carter to spot her. "April, what are you doing here?" The hesitation and unease was clear in his voice and reinforced in his shifting posture. April folded her arms across her chest and forced her expression to speak of the storm raging within her. "We need to talk." Beside him, the blonde tensed, as if unsure what her role in the scenario was. Her wide eyes glanced from Carter to April and back again. "What for?" he asked. She could tell he was trying to sound casual, nonchalant, but April did not miss the slight tremor in his voice. She glanced at the other woman before returning to glare holes through him. "Privately." Carter held out his hands and cocked his head at the woman next to him. "Maybe you didn't notice, but I'm on a date." His eyes locked with hers for the tiniest second before sliding to the side. He was uncomfortable, which only fueled April's fire. He should be uncomfortable after the way he'd treated her. "No, I can definitely see that. And even if I was blind, I could certainly have guessed it from all the unanswered texts and calls." Red flames of embarrassment inched up Carter's neck and jawline. "Yeah, about that." "Who is this woman?" The blonde had finally found her voice, high and whiny as it was. "Who, me?" April placed her hand against her chest and widened her eyes as if shocked. "I'm no one, except the woman he was seeing for the last month." She paused to let the first bomb hit before throwing the final blow. "And the one who's pregnant with his child." April relished the small semblance of satisfaction that surged through her as she watched both Carter's and the blonde's jaws drop. While Carter could only blink, the blonde recovered slightly faster. "I'm sorry, the what?" "The woman who is pregnant with his child," April said again. "Okay, I'm out. I don't need this drama in my life. I'll call a friend." With that, the blonde flicked her hand in a dismissive gesture and scurried away, her heels clacking against the pavement. Carter barely took notice of her leaving. Instead, he opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed, then opened it again. "Are you sure it's mine?" The 5 words slapped April across the face, and her eyes blazed in anger. "Am I sure it's yours? Are you kidding me? You're the only one I've been seeing for the past few weeks, so I'm pretty certain. I thought maybe we were going somewhere, though I should have listened to Lucia. But yeah, Carter, it's yours." Carter sucked in his breath and dragged a hand across his chin. "You're right. I'm sorry. That was crass of me. You caught me off guard." April folded her arms across her chest and leaned back. "Yeah, well, join the club. I didn't think I'd get ghosted the last few weeks, and I certainly didn't think I'd be taking a pregnancy test this morning." "Right. Well, what do you want to do? Do you want money?" April scoffed and shook her head. "That's your first thought? Throw money at the problem and hope it goes away? I thought you were different, Carter." And she really had. She thought back over the dates they'd been on. She had never known for sure if he'd been seeing other women, but the last few weeks he'd called more often and spent nearly the whole weekend with her. She'd been convinced he'd given up any other women if they'd existed, and they'd had so many moments where she really thought they were connecting. Carter threw his hands up. "What do you want me to say, April? I don't want a relationship right now, and I certainly don't want a kid. April swallowed. Even though she'd expected this would be his stance, his words still hurt. So, you want me to terminate the pregnancy? It wasn't a question, and she didn't pose it as one. I mean, don't you think it would be best? He asked. A kid is a lot of responsibility and should be wanted. It wouldn't be fair for us to bring him or her into a less than ideal situation. April's mouth fell open at the irony. How many times had she used that same line of thought to defend the right to choose? Yet now it almost seemed... Actually, she didn't know what it seemed, but it didn't seem right. She didn't even know why it was bothering her. It was what she believed too, wasn't it? And hadn't she decided to confront him to make him decide for her? Well, now she had his decision. And really, he was right. Neither one of them were in the place to have a kid. After all, she had just leased a large office space. She couldn't afford to take off work, and having a kid would definitely require time off, as well as reduced hours toward the end. No, she definitely couldn't be having a kid right now. Yeah, I guess you're right. Okay, I'll call around and get prices. You'll help pay, right? Of course, Carter said, though his eyes would not meet hers. Just call me when you have a number. I promise I'll answer. Fine. April didn't know why, but she suddenly felt dirty, like she was running a drug deal or something, and she knew she had to get away from Carter. She felt like she should say something, but what was there to say? Thanks? See you later? Have a nice night? They all sounded trite and ridiculous in her head, so she opted to say nothing. Instead, she turned and walked back to her car, even more confused now than she was before she came. What was she going to do?